Alright, in the last video we introduced the concept of member functions. We've said in class many times that objects both know things, information that's contained in their fields or instance variable. They know their state, which is all of that information at once. And they also can do things with their member functions. This here, print name and age, because it's a member function of the person class, it has access to the state of the object. And even though we're going to call it with no arguments every time, because it has access to each particular person's state, it's going to do something different. So again, this is a member function. This is the member function prototype, and here we've actually implemented that member function. And we've marked it as part of the person class so that it will have access to the person's first name, last name, and age. If we hadn't marked it part of the person class, it wouldn't know what this first name, last name, and age are. Before, this is what we had. We had to take in arguments, a string first name, a string last name, and a string an integer age. But because it's part of the person class, as marked by this, it has access to the person's first name, last name, and age. It has access to the person's state. That's a member function, as distinct from a non-member function. All right, now let's look at the concept of a constructor. So we have this funny syntax here, and I'll explain. Here we're calling a special kind of function called a constructor. We haven't written that constructor. We get it for free, at least the one that takes in no arguments and doesn't really do anything, except this evaluates, when the C++ code runs, to a new person. It creates a person. This is what it does. It creates a person with a blank first name, a blank last name, and assigns it to this variable P1. P1 gets that person object. So this is calling a special function called a constructor. Let's change the way that our constructor works. I want to make our constructor take in 3 arguments, a first name, a last name, and an age, and create a person with those things instead of them being blank initially. Right now, if you, by the way, here, let's test it out. I'm going to comment this stuff, this code out here. I'm just going to create one person, and I'm just going to call the constructor, and I'm going to print their name and age. Let's just see what they are by default, if I don't set them later. Blank is, so it's blank blank, I guess. I guess the default string is empty string is -8, but okay, so that's a random number. It's whatever happened to be in that location where person P1's age variable is in memory. So hopefully that shows you a little bit of how things are working under the hood. Let's uncomment this code. And let's create our own constructor. We're going to create a constructor. We're going to want to call it like this. We're going to want to tell it this person has a first name Mark, a last name Zuckerberg, and an age of 31. We can now delete these lines, considerably simplifying the code we have here. And this second person is going to be Eduardo, who's 33. So we can't call this code yet because we haven't actually implemented this constructor that takes in these 3 arguments. So we have to write that constructor. We're going to write it up here. Well, first we're going to have a prototype for it. We're going to have a constructor prototype. We're going to say this constructor takes in a string. See this in a second, why I'm calling this P first name. Bear with me. P last name, and int P age. Now these names don't really matter, actually, so don't get too hung up on that. And now we're going to actually implement that constructor. We're going to say it is part of the person class. It is called person. The constructor always has the same name as the class. It's a special kind of function that always has the same name as the class. and it's going to take in 3 parameters. It doesn't return anything, or we don't tell it what it's going to return. We don't say what it's going to return, so that we don't say void, we don't say int, we don't say person, even though it actually does return a person, we don't say that. When I call this special kind of function, the special constructor, it actually returns a person object. It evaluates to a person, and that gets assigned to P1. What we need to do now is we take in this argument, Mark, this argument Zuckerberg, and this argument 31, and somehow we want to get it in this person's instance variables. First name, last name, and age. That doesn't happen automatically. If I ran this code right now, it's going to run. But these arguments that I'm passing in are getting stored temporarily in this string that I've called P first name. Zuckerberg is getting stored temporarily in this variable, this parameter P last name, and 31 is getting stored temporarily in P age. But these are just parameters. They're variables that are only in scope as long as the constructor is running. So as soon as the constructor is done running, these parameters are going to disappear. These pieces of information are going to completely disappear. They never made their way into the instance variables that belong to the person. So the person is going to forget what we told it here. So let's print. I'll run this code, compile and run. Yeah, so both of these people have a random piece of information in them. In order to have the person remember their first and last name and their age, we're going to have to say that the person's first name is whatever we passed in to the parameter P first name. So it's going to take Mark, it's passed as the first argument of the constructor, temporarily store it in this parameter P first name, and we're going to say that the first name field of my person P1 is going to get whatever value is stored in there. And then we're going to repeat that. We're going to say that the last name of this particular person is whatever is stored temporarily in the parameter P last name. And finally, the instance variable age of this person, the field age of this person, gets whatever is temporarily stored in P age, the third parameter. So now what's happening when I call this function is that the special function, this constructor, is that Mark is getting passed in as the first argument. So just like normal functions, it gets stored in this parameter P first name. And now I'm saying that the first name function that belongs to this particular person is going to get the value that's stored in there. Same thing for all of those. So when I run this code, we get what we want. That is the concept of a constructor, and we'll go a little bit further with the next video. We're going to see the concept of overloading constructors. We're going to create another kind of constructor that doesn't take in any arguments. It turns out we don't get that for free anymore. We can no longer create a person P3 with no arguments. This is not an option anymore because we created this other constructor. So we'll see that in a second.